So today we do commemorate, as has been said several times, the 90th anniversary of this church, the 90th anniversary of its founding. It's our birthday. And so please do join us downstairs for birthday cake at our reception. We're celebrating this community's presence in our larger Harvard community and 90 years of it. But as you've also heard in many of our prayers and the prayers that Roni just read, the founding of this church 90 years ago in 1932 was on the 10-year anniversary of Armistice in Europe. This towering spire, this lovely church at the heart of this campus, all was built here as a memorial, as you know, to the war dead. And I have to tell you, when I was appointed to this position, that was the responsibility that weighed most heavily upon me. I have committees and all these other kinds of things I have to do around the university as part of my role as the minister of this church. But the first time I walked into this church as its minister and saw the names on the wall to your right and understood myself as the steward of those memories, of those lives that were not fully lived, that was the thing and remains the thing, the responsibility that weighs most heavily upon me. For obvious reasons, but also because, as many of you know, I served in the Navy. My dad retired from the Navy. My brother was in the Air Force. My younger brother is still in the Navy. I feel great admiration and respect for those who serve and who still serve. And so as I reflected this week on the 90th anniversary of this church, I thought about that day 90 years ago. And I wondered what that dedication event must have been like. The feeling that those who gathered here to dedicate this church must have felt putting 10 years behind them. Not that anything could compensate for the loss of all those whose names are on our walls, but there must have been a great feeling of both grief and relief to see this soaring church erected in their memory. So let me return to that day 90 years ago, 1932, and the group I imagined gathered here dedicating this place in the midst of grief and relief and seeing the tower of this beautiful church rising above the yard in memory to the war dead. It's an attractive picture, but you historians in the congregation know it is not the full picture. In 1932, this country was deep in a devastating depression. 1 in 4 people in this country were unemployed. Perhaps more troublingly, Hermann Göring had just been made the president of the Reichstag in Germany. In November of 1932, when this church was dedicated, Hitler asked to be made chancellor. They put him off for a few months. He didn't become chancellor until January of 1933. In 1932, Japan had just invaded Manchuria and established a puppet state there. In 1932, when this church was dedicated, all the walls inside this sanctuary were bare. The names were only in the memorial room. But what I'm telling you is that in 1932, when this church was dedicated, events had already been set in motion, which would put the names of all those people on the wall to your right. We have this passage of Apocalypse today, and our own moment is one full of uncertainty and worry, global worry around climate change, political worry. Like many of you, I suspect I found great relief this week after our elections. The fact that a midterm election could give me such great relief is just a sign of how worrisome things are. How worrisome they still are. We know some of what's coming. We fear some of what may come that we don't know. This is true globally, politically, but also in our personal lives. What's next for us and for those we love, for our relationships, for those we care about? This is a beautiful church, soaring above this yard, and I will not predict that the stones out of which this beautiful church is built, I will not predict that they will fall down, one upon another. God forbid. I hope this church always stands. But looking at the names on the walls of this church, we do know, that there are no institutions so secure that they cannot be brought down. But we celebrate this church, and we return to it every week, not because it will stand forever, but because of the values for which it stands, the values for which the men and women on these walls died. And so this day, as we enter this church again and commemorate these 90 years and commemorate the war dead, I invite you also to remember those early followers of Jesus who went to the temple every day, a temple they knew would fall, and went there blessing God, setting their hearts, gaining their souls, even though they knew the worst was yet to come. May we, like them, take courage as we face an uncertain future.